Lyra stood on the edge of the plateau, the wind from Elithra, 9 whipping her hair across her face. She felt the chill of the dying planet in her bones, a strange cold that seemed to reach into her very soul. The colony she had worked so hard to establish was crumbling. Equipment failed faster than she could repair it, the atmosphere was thinning, and the distant skies glowed with a sickly red that warned of the planet's imminent collapse. All around her, once vibrant flora now lay twisted and brittle, their colors faded into dull ash and gray. She had come to Elithra, 9, to study, to learn, to help her species understand the fragility of life. But now she felt nothing but despair. Every step she took was heavy, as if the planet itself were resisting her movement, pressing her down. Lyra's hands shook as she clutched her toolkit, the devices she had carried for years now useless against the planet's failing conditions. She had tried everything, stabilizing the oxygen generators, repairing the life support modules, even attempting to coax the few surviving plants into producing more oxygen. But all efforts were in vain. The numbers on her monitors dropped steadily, a silent countdown to the end she could no longer escape. She sank to the ground, leaning against the cold rock of the plateau. Her chest ached, not just from lack of oxygen, but from the weight of realization. She had always believed in the strength of knowledge, in the power of preparation and science to overcome any challenge. Yet here she was, utterly powerless, staring at the certainty of death. She closed her eyes, willing herself to accept it, to find peace in the inevitability of the end. In that moment, she remembered the stories her ancestors had told her about the first explorers of the stars, tales of courage and sacrifice, of humans who faced the unknown with a smile, even when all hope seemed lost. She had always thought of them as inspiring but distant, almost mythical. Here on a dying planet, she felt that myth fading into her own reality. Her breaths were shallow now, each inhale a struggle, each exhale a surrender. She let her mind drift, imagining the darkness that would soon consume her, preparing to embrace it fully. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a strange warmth that contrasted sharply with the biting cold. Lyra opened her eyes slightly, squinting into the shifting dust and shadows. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by oxygen deprivation. But then she saw it. A figure, moving steadily toward her across the plateau. The figure was humanoid, tall and solid, with a calm presence that seemed impossible in this desolate place. Lyra's heart, long dulled by despair, skipped a beat. She tried to rise, but her legs refused to obey. The figure stopped a few meters away, kneeling beside her. Its hand extended gently, a gesture simple yet profound. Lyra stared, unsure whether to reach for it or recoil. There was no weapon, no threat, only the quiet certainty of life in the stranger's eyes. "Take my hand," the figure said, voice steady and soothing. Lyra hesitated. The last time she had felt trust, the last time she had felt hope, seemed like a distant memory, buried beneath years of isolation and struggle. Her instincts screamed caution, but something deep within her, a small spark she thought had died long ago, urged her to grasp it. Her fingers brushed against the stranger's hand, and a warmth unlike anything she had felt in weeks surged through her. It was not just physical warmth, but a presence that reached into her mind, easing the panic and despair that had taken root. She felt strength, resilience, and an odd sense of calm. She let herself be pulled up, leaning on the stranger as she stood, shaky but upright. Who are you?" she managed, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Elias," the human said, his gaze steady. "I came to help." Lyra's mind reeled. Humans were not native to Elithra. 9. Their missions rarely ventured this far, and never alone. She had read of human explorers who traveled light years into unknown space, but she had never imagined meeting one. And yet here he was, alive and certain, bringing hope in the midst of hopelessness. Elias gestured to a small device he carried on his belt. With a few careful adjustments, he activated it, and a faint hum filled the air. Instantly, the oxygen levels around them rose slightly, enough for Lyra to breathe without the painful struggle she had endured. The device was simple, crude compared to the alien technology she had relied on, but it worked. Lyra felt a flicker of amazement. "Where did you learn this?" she asked, astonished. "Experience," Elias replied with a small smile. "Humans have a way of adapting when nothing else works." Lyra wanted to say more, to question, to challenge, to understand, but her body was too weak. Instead, she allowed herself to follow Elias as he led her away from the plateau toward a sheltered area he had identified. Each step was difficult, but with his steady guidance, she found herself moving further than she had in days. As they walked, Lyra studied Elias quietly. There was a simplicity to him that contrasted sharply with the complexity she had always associated with survival. He carried no elaborate instruments, no automated machines, yet he moved with purpose, noticing details she had overlooked, making adjustments that seemed intuitive rather than calculated. It was human, she realized, a kind of brilliance born not from design but from instinct, compassion, and determination. The landscape around them was harsh and unwelcoming. Twisted plants jutted out of cracked soil, and the sky burned with a persistent red glow that hinted at the planet's instability. Yet with Elias beside her, Lyra felt the impossible notion of hope creeping back into her chest. She realized that survival might not come from technology alone, or from careful planning, or even from sheer strength. Sometimes it came from the connection between beings, the willingness to trust, to reach out, to act when the outcome was uncertain. Hours passed, though time felt strange on the dying planet. They reached a small overhang of rock, a natural shelter that would protect them from the wind. Elias motioned for her to sit while he activated his device again, ensuring that the oxygen level remained stable. Lyra sank to the ground, exhausted but alive. She realized that for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she was breathing easily. "You saved me," she said softly, almost in disbelief. Elias shook his head. "I didn't save you. We saved each other. You took my hand when you had every reason not to. That's what matters." Lyra stared at him, words failing her. The simplicity and truth of his statement struck her deeply. She had spent years surrounded by advanced technology, by complex theories and endless calculations. Yet it was the human quality of connection and trust that had brought her back from the brink. As the alien sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows over the broken landscape, Lyra felt a shift within herself. The despair that had once consumed her was still present, but it was no longer the only force in her chest. Alongside it was a flicker of determination, a spark that urged her to look forward rather than backward, to act rather than surrender. Elias sat beside her, silent but supportive. The two shared no need for constant words. Their presence was enough. In that moment, Lyra understood something fundamental. Survival was more than the preservation of life. It was about hope, trust, and the courage to keep moving even when everything seemed lost. Humans, she realized, carried that courage naturally, almost instinctively. As the red sky darkened and the first stars of Elythra, 9 began to twinkle faintly above. Lyra closed her eyes once more, but this time, not to accept death. She closed them to feel, to understand, and to begin imagining life beyond the edge of despair. A human hand had reached across hopelessness, and in it, she found the first thread of hope she had allowed herself in too long. For the first time in days, Lyra smiled. Lyra woke to the soft hum of Elias's device. The air around them felt lighter, calmer, and for the first time in days, her lungs expanded fully, without pain. She stretched carefully, savoring the simple pleasure of breathing deeply. Outside? Elythra? 9's scarlet sky was beginning to pale. The faint glow of dawn touching the jagged landscape with hints of soft orange and pink. Elias had already moved a little ways from the shelter. Surveying the land, he seemed almost at home, despite the planet's apparent hostility. Lyra watched him quietly, noting how he observed the ground, how he adjusted his simple equipment with precise, confident movements. There was no frantic rushing, no panic gestures, just steady attention, patience, and care. "Good morning," he said without turning. His voice was calm, but there was a spark of warmth in it that made her chest feel lighter. "You slept well?" Lyra blinked and smiled weakly. "Better than I expected." She realized that it had been a genuine statement, not just polite words. For days she had known exhaustion, hopelessness, and fear. Now she felt a cautious sense of calm. "We need to move," Elias continued, walking back toward her. "The plateau is exposed. We should find more stable ground, somewhere with a shelter and steady oxygen." Lyra nodded, standing slowly. Her body still felt weak, but she knew she could walk now. The human's presence gave her confidence. She didn't fully understand. Each step with him beside her seemed lighter than it had in days, as if the air itself carried more strength than it had before. They moved together carefully, navigating jagged rocks and brittle, twisted plant life. Elithra 9 was unforgiving. The planet itself seemed to test their every movement. But Elias never faltered. He scanned the terrain with practiced attention, noting changes in the soil, in the air, and the faint sounds of distant winds. Lyra began to follow his lead, observing what he observed, learning to read the planet in a way she hadn't considered before. "Why are humans so different?" she asked quietly after a while. The question had been on her mind since she first saw him. You come into situations like this and adapt, not with tools or machines, but with yourself. Elias glanced at her and smiled softly. "I think it comes from needing to survive with what's around you. We've had to learn to improvise, to trust, to find solutions where none seem to exist. It's not about technology. It's about seeing possibilities instead of limitations." Lyra considered this. She had relied on technology, on knowledge, on careful preparation for everything in her life. Yet here, on a planet that defied her understanding, Elias thrived simply by acting, observing, and trusting in himself and others. There was a brilliance in it, not of calculations or machines, but of instinct and empathy. As they walked, Lyra began to notice details she had overlooked, small cracks in the rocks that could shelter fragile life, pockets of plants that seemed to filter the air in subtle ways, tiny crevices where water had collected from the last planetary storms. Elithra 9 was dying, yes, but it was not yet dead, and with Elias's guidance she could see that life, however fragile, still had a chance. They found a shallow canyon by midday, a place partially sheltered from the wind. Elias knelt and examined the ground carefully, tapping at the rocks, listening to the echoes. Then he motioned for Lyra to follow. "This could work," he said simply. "The air is more stable here, and there's enough rock overhang to protect us from the dust storms that come in the evening." Lyra watched as he worked. He didn't carry the elaborate tools she was used to. Instead, he used simple instruments, some of which she didn't recognize. Yet every action was deliberate, effective, and calm. He built a small air purification setup using natural features, adjusting vents and filters to stabilize their immediate environment. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. "You could have survived here on your own?" Lyra asked, amazed. "I could have tried," he said with a shrug, "but humans are better together. We survive by helping each other, even in the smallest ways. That makes a difference." Lyra considered this as she unpacked some supplies she had carried from the plateau. Simple rations, a water filter, and her scientific instruments. It occurred to her that the human's approach was remarkably similar to her own training, but with one crucial difference. Elias worked with the world and the people in it, not against it. Where she had measured, calculated, and predicted, he had observed, adapted, and acted. Hours passed as they established a temporary camp. Lyra documented their surroundings, taking notes on the air pockets, the small plants that survived, and the subtle changes in temperature and pressure. Yet she found herself increasingly distracted by Elias's presence. He moved quietly, calmly, efficiently, and with a natural attentiveness that made her feel safe even in this dying world. "You're learning fast," he observed, noticing her careful notes and adjustments. "I can tell you've survived hard situations before, but Elithra, 9 is different. It tests you in ways you might not expect." Lyra nodded. "I know now that survival isn't just about knowledge or tools. It's more than that." She hesitated, searching for the words. "It's courage, trust, the willingness to keep moving even when everything seems lost." Elias smiled. "Exactly. That's human strength. We've survived because we keep going, because we trust, because we help." "You've taken the first steps towards seeing it in yourself, too." For the first time, Lyra realized that she had been measuring her own worth by achievements and efficiency. Yet here, on this harsh world, what mattered most was not mastery over the environment, but the connection between beings, a simple touch, a shared effort, the willingness to act when all hope seems gone. That was what brought life back. By evening, the winds began to pick up, sweeping dust and debris across the canyon. Lyra huddled beneath the rock overhang, feeling the small relief of Elias's presence beside her. He adjusted the air filter again, making small changes that improved the flow. She watched him work silently, fascinated by the rhythm of his movements, the calm certainty with which he approached challenges. "You know," she said after a long pause, "I was ready to die yesterday. I had accepted it. I closed my eyes and prepared to let go. But you..."
"You changed that." A human hand reached across despair, and suddenly I could breathe again.
"Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally." Elias placed a hand lightly on hers, a gesture that was neither intimate nor casual, but supportive. "You found strength in yourself, too. You didn't just take my hand, you accepted it. That's why we're here now. Survival is never one-sided. It's about working together." Lyra felt warmth spread through her chest, a sensation she hadn't experienced in weeks. The despair that had held her so tightly began to loosen, replaced by a growing awareness. Hope was not impossible. Survival was not hopeless. And even on a planet that seemed determined to die, life could persist if one had the courage to act and the presence of others to lean on. They ate a simple meal together, sharing water and rations. Lyra found herself laughing quietly at small observations Elias made about the odd shapes of the dying plants, or the strange echoes of the canyon. It was surreal yet comforting to find joy in something so simple amid the harshness around them. Night fell over Elithra. 9, the red sky fading into deep indigo, studded with unfamiliar stars. Lyra stared at the sky, feeling a strange sense of wonder. She had spent her life studying the universe from afar, observing planets through instruments, but now she was living it firsthand, guided by a human whose presence illuminated the darkness. Elias leaned against the rock beside her. "You'll see more of the planet tomorrow," he said softly. "It's hard, yes, but there's beauty here. Even in dying worlds, life leaves traces. You just need to know how to see them." Lyra nodded. She felt a sense of purpose rising in her chest. She would continue to observe, to document, to learn, but now with a new understanding. Survival was not just science. Survival was courage. Survival was hope. And humans carried it in ways she had never imagined. As she closed her eyes that night, she did not prepare for death. Instead, she envisioned the day ahead, the path through the canyon, the exploration of the hidden pockets of life. She thought of the humans who had survived impossible odds across the stars, and of the one beside her now. And she understood something profound. Life was never solitary. It thrived in connection, in trust, in reaching out when despair seemed inevitable. Lyra drifted into sleep, her hand still brushing against Elias's, and for the first time since she had felt the cold embrace of despair, she slept with hope. The morning on Elythra. 9 was quieter than the previous day, but no less strange. The planet seemed to breathe slowly, as if it were observing Lyra and Elias, testing their intentions. The red skies had faded into a soft amber, and a thin layer of mist hovered over the jagged rocks, giving the landscape an otherworldly glow. Lyra stretched carefully, savoring the warmth of the weak sun. Her body had grown stronger with each step, her confidence slowly returning. Elias was already moving when she opened her eyes. He stood atop a small ridge, surveying the terrain with his characteristic calm. Lyra noticed the way he tilted his head, adjusting his observation based on subtle shifts in light, shadows, and the faint rustle of wind through the brittle flora. She admired his patience and his ability to notice details she might have missed entirely. Humans, she thought, were remarkable in the way they could perceive life where others only saw desolation. "Are you ready?" Elias called down to her, a small smile on his face. Lyra nodded, grabbing her equipment. Today, he had promised, they would explore a region of the planet that might still hold small pockets of life. It was a risky endeavor in terms of resources and physical strain, but the promise of discovery outweighed her fear. She had learned something important. Survival was not just about enduring the present, but understanding it. And with Elias, the path forward seemed possible. They moved together across the rocky plains, careful to step on the more stable ground. Every few meters, Elias would pause and gesture for her to observe something. A cluster of plants still clinging stubbornly to life, a thin trickle of water from a crack in the rocks, a faint shimmer in the air that suggested oxygen concentration. Lyra recorded everything meticulously, but she found herself not just observing the planet, but also observing Elias. His methods were simple yet precise, intuitive yet calculated in a way that seemed natural. "You see life differently than most humans," she said after a while. "You notice small things that could mean survival or death, yet you do not panic." "I notice what matters. Panic doesn't help anyone. Humans survive not because we are the strongest, but because we pay attention and act wisely. Sometimes survival is about small steps, patience, and cooperation. Everything else is secondary." Lyra considered this as she followed his lead. Her years of scientific training had taught her to calculate, predict, and control. But here, the planet did not respond to prediction. It responded to observation, adaptation, and respect. She began to understand that survival was a skill of mind and heart, not just knowledge. By midday, they arrived at a narrow canyon that seemed to hide something precious. The walls were jagged and steep, but Elias pointed out a series of small caves and crevices that created a natural shelter. The air was slightly warmer here, and there was a faint hint of moisture. Lyra knelt to inspect the ground, her fingers brushing against soil that still retained the faint pulse of life. Tiny sprouts pushed through cracks in the rocks, and in a shaded area, small pools of water reflected the weak sunlight. "Life," Elias said simply, kneeling beside her. "Even here, it finds a way." Lyra felt a surge of awe. The planet was dying, yes, but pockets of resilience remained, and humans, she realized, had the capacity to recognize and nurture that resilience. It was not just physical survival, it was the ability to inspire hope, to take action, and to preserve life in subtle, meaningful ways. They spent hours carefully moving through the canyon, documenting plants, measuring air quality, and noting the natural features that might support life. Elias taught her small techniques to use minimal resources efficiently, how to divert a tiny stream of water, how to arrange rocks to create natural windbreaks, how to identify which plants still filtered oxygen. Every lesson was simple yet profound, and Lyra absorbed them eagerly. As they rested near one of the small pools, Lyra spoke quietly. "I've always studied planets, observed them from afar, but I never truly understood what survival meant until now. You make it look possible, even when it seems impossible." Elias smiled. "Humans are built to find possibility. It's not about ignoring danger or difficulty. It's about focusing on what can be done. You've seen it in yourself, too. You didn't give up yesterday. You took the first step, and that's what matters." Lyra reflected on his words. The despair she had felt when stranded on the plateau seemed like a distant memory. It had been replaced by determination, curiosity, and an awareness of the subtle strength within herself. Elias had not just saved her physically, he had shown her how to survive emotionally and mentally, how to see hope where she had thought none existed. They continued their exploration, discovering small wonders hidden in the canyon. Tiny glowing fungi clung to damp rocks, reflecting a soft light that seemed to pulse with life. A cluster of plants released a faint mist, purifying the air in a localized area. Lyra marveled at these discoveries, but even more, she marveled at Elias's ability to recognize their significance instantly. "You see patterns in life that I would have overlooked," she admitted. "Experience and observation," he replied. "But also trust. You need to trust yourself and the environment. Fear clouds perception. Hope clarifies it." The day stretched into afternoon, and Lyra began to notice changes within herself. She no longer felt the same exhaustion that had plagued her on the plateau. Her mind was sharper, her movements steadier, and her heart lighter. She realized that humans were not just survivors, they were catalysts. By simply being present, Elias had reminded her of the possibilities she had nearly forgotten. As evening approached, the canyon became cooler, shadows stretching long and distorted across the rocks. Lyra and Elias found a higher ledge to rest on, overlooking the canyon below. The wind whispered softly, carrying the faint scent of minerals and life. Lyra felt a sense of peace she had not known in weeks. "Tomorrow," Elias said, "we explore further. There may be more pockets like this. If we are careful and observant, we can map them and find ways to stabilize life. Not just for us, but for the future of this planet." Lyra nodded, inspired by his words. The concept of leaving a mark, of helping life persist even in such a hostile environment, was new to her. Her scientific curiosity combined with Elias's practical wisdom made her feel capable of more than survival. She felt a responsibility to act, to learn, and to preserve. Night fell over the canyon, the stars of Elythra, 9 appearing one by one in the dark sky. Lyra and Elias settled near a natural alcove, sharing a simple meal. They spoke quietly of life, of survival, and of the small triumphs they had observed throughout the day. Lyra found herself laughing softly at Elias's playful commentary about the odd shapes of plants and rocks, a laughter she had not felt in weeks. "You know," she said as she looked up at the stars, "I used to think survival was about machines, calculations, and preparation. But it's not. It's trust, observation, and action. And humans seem to embody that perfectly." Elias placed a hand lightly on hers. "And you've learned it too. That's why survival works. Not just because of strength, but because of courage, hope, and connection. That's what makes humans different. And now, you carry a part of that with you." Lyra felt warmth and determination rising within her chest. She realized that she had been given a gift, not just of life, but of perspective. Elythra. 9 was a dying planet, yet life persisted in small, meaningful ways, and humans had a unique ability to recognize, nurture, and inspire that life. As sleep approached, Lyra allowed herself to feel gratitude, hope, and excitement for the day ahead. She was no longer the scientist who had faced death with closed eyes. She was a witness, a learner, and a participant in the subtle miracles of life. The human beside her had shown her that survival was not simply enduring the impossible, but embracing the possible. She drifted into sleep with Elias's presence close by, comforted by the knowledge that the next day held discovery, learning, and the continued reaffirmation of hope. And for the first time in her life, Lyra understood fully the quiet, extraordinary strength of humans, their ability to adapt, to inspire, and to illuminate the darkness, even when the world itself seemed determined to die. The sun rose slowly over Elithra, 9, spilling a faint golden light across the canyon, where Lyra and Elias had made their temporary camp. The planet was still harsh, still fragile, but the morning carried a sense of calm. Lyra stretched, savoring the warmth and the ease of her breathing. After days of struggle and discovery, she felt stronger, not just in body, but in mind and heart. Elias was already moving, scanning the rocky terrain as he had done each morning. Lyra watched him for a moment, appreciating the quiet determination in his posture, the way he seemed to notice even the smallest details that might hint at pockets of life. She had learned so much from him over the past days, but now she realized that she had begun to see the world differently, not just through the lens of survival, but through the lens of possibility and hope. "Ready?" Elias asked, turning toward her with a small, encouraging smile. Lyra nodded. "Yes. Let's see what the planet has for us today." Together they moved deeper into the canyon system. Each step was deliberate, careful, but also filled with purpose. Lyra noted the subtle signs of life around them, a faint green sprout breaking through a crack in the rock, a small shimmer in the water, indicating its purity, a cluster of tiny fungi glowing softly in the shadowed areas. Every discovery reminded her that Elithra, 9, was not entirely lost. Life, in its quiet and persistent way, still persisted. Elias paused to point out a formation of rocks that created a natural vent. "This area is particularly stable. The airflow helps regulate the temperature and oxygen," he explained. "If we document it carefully, it could become a base for future life support systems, or even a sanctuary for surviving species." Lyra nodded eagerly, her scientific instincts awakening fully. She began measuring and recording, carefully noting everything Elias observed. But she also paid attention to the human beside her, the way he thought through problems, noticed the subtle shifts in the environment, and acted calmly, without panic. She had always relied on machines, on precision instruments, on complex calculations, but now she realized that humans brought something equally valuable: intuition, empathy, and a relentless optimism that could turn impossible situations into achievable goals. As they explored further, Lyra began to see patterns she had not noticed before. Small patches of life were connected, forming fragile networks that seemed to resist the planet's decline. Water collected naturally in some areas, while plants helped maintain air quality. These subtle interconnections reminded her of the delicate balance of ecosystems she had studied on other worlds. But here the lessons were immediate, tangible, and alive before her eyes. At one point, they discovered a hidden cave system that seemed untouched. The entrance was narrow and shaded, and a faint coolness emanated from within. Elias gestured for her to follow. Inside, the air was fresher, slightly richer in oxygen, and the walls were lined with tiny moss-like plants that glimmered faintly. Pools of water reflected the dim light, creating the illusion of stars scattered across the cave floor. "This could be a safe haven," Elias said softly. "It's small but stable. We could set up a longer-term camp here if needed." Lyra felt awe rise in her chest. The cave was a secret gem, hidden within a planet she had once thought irredeemable. And yet, it was the human beside her who had led her to it. Not through brute force or technology, but through careful observation, patience, and trust. She realized that humans had an extraordinary gift, the ability to see potential where others only saw despair. As they settled near the water pools, Elias demonstrated simple techniques for monitoring air and water quality using minimal resources. Lyra followed carefully, taking notes and replicating his methods. She realized that she had learned more in these few days than she could have in years of solo research. Not only had she discovered new aspects of the planet, but she had also discovered something profound about life itself, and about humans. Humans survive differently than most species I've studied, she said quietly, almost to herself. Not just because of strength or intelligence, but because of hope, adaptability, and trust. And they share it willingly. Elias smiled, a gentle expression that carried no pride, only understanding. We've learned to depend on each other. Life is rarely a solitary effort. Even in the hardest conditions, the ones who survive are the ones who act together, who notice, who care, and who never give up completely. Lyra nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle in her mind. She remembered the moment on the plateau when she had nearly accepted death, when despair had seemed inevitable. That moment had changed because of a simple human gesture, a hand extended in trust, a calm presence in the midst of chaos. It was not a miraculous device or a complex machine that had saved her, but a human being willing to act with courage and empathy. Night fell again, soft and quiet, with the faint glow of Elithra, 9's distant stars reflecting in the pools of water. Lyra and Elias rested near the cave entrance, sharing a simple meal and observing the subtle movements of life around them. Tiny insects crawled across the moss, plants exhaled faint oxygen into the air, and water rippled gently from unseen sources. The planet was still fragile, but it was alive, and they had found ways to preserve that life, at least for the time being. "You've changed the way I see survival," Lyra said softly, her voice tinged with wonder. "I used to believe it was about strength, preparation, and machines, but now I know it's more, about perception, trust, and courage. And humans embody it perfectly." Elias reached out and placed a hand lightly on hers, a gesture of shared understanding rather than intimacy. "And you've learned it too. That's what matters. Life thrives when we act together, when we notice, when we hope. That's the difference humans make. And now, you carry part of it with you." The following days were filled with quiet exploration and documentation. Lyra and Elias mapped out the cave system, noting areas where oxygen pockets were strongest, where water collected, and where plant life thrived. They identified places where future researchers could safely observe and support the remaining life forms. Every discovery was small but meaningful, each one a testament to persistence, observation, and cooperation. Lyra found herself reflecting on what she had learned, not just about Elithra, 9, but about life itself. She had believed that survival was about control, about technology, about preparation. But now she understood that survival required something deeper: courage, hope, empathy, and the willingness to act in the face of uncertainty. She had witnessed it firsthand in Elias, and she had learned to embody it herself. Finally, the day came when rescue ships arrived to transport them back to the human research station orbiting Elithra, 9. As Lyra prepared to leave the planet she had once thought doomed, she felt a mixture of sadness and gratitude. She was leaving a fragile world behind, but she was taking with her invaluable knowledge, new perspectives, and the profound understanding of human resilience. Elias stood beside her as the shuttle approached. "You've learned a lot," he said quietly. "Not just about the planet, but about yourself and what life can endure. Remember that. Humanity thrives because we carry hope, courage, and compassion wherever we go." Lyra nodded, her heart full. She looked back at Elithra, 9, at the canyon, the cave, the tiny pockets of life they had discovered. The planet was fragile, but it was not empty, and she realized that life, even in its smallest forms, was worth protecting. As the shuttle lifted off, Lyra reached for Elias's hand one last time. The gesture was simple, yet it carried a weight of meaning. She had learned that connection, trust, and hope could change the course of survival. A human hand had guided her through despair, taught her the value of courage, and inspired her to see possibility where there had been none. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the shuttle's windows, and Lyra felt a sense of awe and gratitude. Life was vast, fragile, and often unpredictable. But it was also extraordinary, persistent, and beautiful. And humans, she realized fully now, carried within them a force that could illuminate even the darkest corners of the universe. Empathy, hope, and the courage to act. She closed her eyes, not in fear, but in reflection. She had faced the edge of despair and found herself alive, not just in body, but in spirit. And she understood something she had never truly known before. Survival was not merely enduring, it was choosing to hope, to act, and to connect, no matter how impossible the circumstances seemed.
Elithra.
9 receded behind them, a planet scarred and fragile, yet still alive in small, remarkable ways. Lyra carried the memory of its quiet wonders and of the human beside her, who had changed everything. She knew that wherever she went next, whatever challenges awaited her, she would carry the lessons of courage, hope, and trust. And she would never forget the hand that had reached across despair to remind her of what it truly meant to live.